Good morning. So this is our next session on leadership development in education. Today we've got a fantastic speaker with us today, which I'll go through in a minute. But first of all, I'd just like to welcome everybody that has signed up. The numbers are climbing as we speak. I hope that you enjoyed the session today. Today, we've got Professor Dame Alison Peacock, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have her live with us today. Dame Alison is the Chief Executive for the Chartered College of Teaching, and the College of Teaching at the moment has currently approximately 34,000 members, and that's climbing as we speak. The breadth of knowledge that Dame Alison has is immense. I mean, she's been executive head of the Wroxham School, sorry. She's also worked across the sector, so in primary, secondary, and in various advisory roles as well. She's also an honorary fellow of the Queen's College, Cambridge, and she's also a Royal Society's Education Committee member. And she's got a variety of roles that she does at various universities as well. She gives so much to our sector and continues to do so, and wants to look at different ways forward and new ways forward to support the education sector. So what I'm going to do is, before anything happens, I'm going to start our session with Dame Alison's video. So without further ado, here is Dame Alison.
Hello, my name is Professor Dame Alison Peacock. I work for the Chartered College of Teaching, and today I'm going to be thinking with you about why we should feel optimistic about the current situation in our schools and colleges. Indeed, an unprecedented time. The reason I think that we have cause for optimism is because as teachers and school leaders, we effectively make the weather. If we don't feel confident and upbeat, then the youngsters and families who look to us similarly become increasingly worried. So let's think about what we could find that could be reason to make us smile, to make us laugh, to make us feel that this is something that we can get through together. So I'm outlining 10 reasons, and the first of these is that we work with children and young people. And we all know that working with youngsters is such an energy-giving thing to do. They're full of life, they're full of humour, they're full of wickedness in the nicest possible way. And to be a teacher is to relate to all of that and to build on that energy and to direct that energy into a positive space. And all the children and young people that we were working with when we came back to school after the break, at the beginning of this year, are still our classes. They're still our young people, but they're just in very different places. They're in their homes. They're not in our classrooms in many cases. But the relationships that we've built with them since September hold dear. And those are the relationships that will need to keep us connected so that we can make the difference that we possibly can for them at this very unusual time. And we know that children and young people are incredibly resilient, and often we worry about them in all kinds of ways, but the reality is everybody's worried at the moment in terms of the pandemic. So being able to offer some normality, being able to be there to be the teacher that you always were, whether that's at the end of the phone, whether it's through email, whether it's through web conferencing, whatever your means of connecting with your students, they will absolutely relish that opportunity to be able to feel part of the normal life that they knew before and that we knew before. So that's my reason number one. And that's the reason we came into teaching in the first place, isn't it? Because we wanted to be with the children and young people and make a difference. My second reason is that as teachers, we work as part of a community. We have so many colleagues who are all trying to do the same as we are, trying to balance the demands of a very tricky job, a very tricky career, but also colleagues who we can reach out to who are like-minded. I now lead, having had a career teaching all my life in both primary and secondary schools, I have now moved to leading a new organisation called the Chartered College of Teaching. And I say we're new because we'll probably be called new until we're at least 50 years old. When you think of all the you think of all the royal colleges for medicine and so on, they've been going for 150 years. We've been established in our current format for 3 years, and we are very keen to build a community that celebrates teachers, that supports you and your colleagues, but also connects everybody. And at the time we moved towards lockdown, it became very clear to us that we would need to start to work differently from the way that we've been working before, as you have in your role as a teacher, but that we had a very vital role to play in pulling the whole of the teaching profession together, in making sure that we presented a very positive, upbeat voice on behalf of our profession. Because at a time when everything feels incredibly difficult, the last thing we need are more people laying on the difficulties around everything. So we've tried to be very helpful, and we've established all kinds of resources that we've got on a free access page, a COVID-19 page on our website, so that if you're not already a member, there are lots of things that you can go on to and have a look at. The website is chartered.college. But we're also gathering colleagues to us to create a whole range of opportunities going forward for teachers. So, for example, teachers who have no longer been able to be in school because they were training to teach and suddenly all of that has stopped, we're providing an early career hub for teachers. We're going to use videos that we've recorded over the last 3 years of classrooms. We've got nearly 200 of those, and we'll situate those within commentary from expert teachers, but also provide an opportunity for colleagues to be able to debate and talk about the things that they're seeing and to do more reading. So very much building on the notion of a reflective teacher. So there's an opportunity. That's something that's come forward that perhaps we might have taken several years to have done otherwise, but as it is, we're working with universities and otherwise to provide a resource for early career teachers. But also we're working with our fellows, we're working with our teachers who've been teaching a long time and our school leaders. We're recording vlogs, we're doing all kinds of things to help people reflect what this process feels like, and to make sure that nobody feels that they're alone. Because when you're a teacher, you're part of a great history, a great tradition of educationalists, but also you're one of nearly 500,000 colleagues across the country, all of whom are seeking to do the very best they can. Of course, we know we don't always agree about everything, but that makes for lively debates. And what we do at the Chartered College is we're not about telling people what they should think. What we try to do is to present the evidence in as even a way as we possibly can, so that to be a professional is to make up your mind related to your children, your young people, your context, your school. We're here not to say this is right or that's wrong. We're here to help colleagues to make those very wise decisions. And because we know that this is an exceptional time, we've reached out to the Behavioural Insights team who work with the Cabinet Office to work with them to establish a programme whereby you can be connected. You don't have to be a member of the Chartered College. All you need to do is to visit our website and to provide your mobile phone number or your email address if you would prefer, and we will sign you up to join a community called Teach Together. And this community will receive messages once a week, that's all, it's not too intrusive, but once a week, written by a psychologist. And this comes from the whole premise that we benefit from evidence-informed practice. So the project that was took place, first of all, in the States, took place after 9/11. And what they found there was that when colleagues received messages, as you would receive if you joined Teach Together, from a psychologist, these are colleagues who'd been working with the aftermath of 9/11, they actually felt that much better because they felt joined together as a community, working together in very challenging circumstances, but nevertheless not on their own. So we would love it if you would choose to join that community. It's just another way of making sure that you realise that your effort is part of a huge collective effort in terms of trying to make the best we can of a situation that none of us have been through before, but also making sure that we learn from each other, that we collaborate, that we share our best ideas. This project's been going for a couple of weeks already, and we've done things like we've asked people to share just briefly, what might they be doing that evening that would make them feel better after a long day at work, and just sharing things that people are doing, whether that's taking the dog for a walk or reading or watching a show with the family or whatever it may be. These things just help people to see that they're not on their own, and you definitely are not on your own. The fourth area that I've decided to look at is that of creativity. Because actually, and it's interesting, once you say creativity, in my mind, that kind of straight away leaps to things like, oh, now she's talking about, can I draw or play music or, can I be creative? What I mean by this is that when you're a teacher, you have all kinds of opportunities to constantly be learning and thinking differently about how you connect with your community. Now, if ever we needed a time when we could connect, it's now. Because what we know, of course, is that whilst we're all in a lockdown situation, some of us are with friends, family. Some of us are able to contact colleagues readily. Some of us perhaps feel much more isolated. But the reality is, the work that we're trying to do is all centred around connections. Because a child can watch a computer screen if they're lucky enough to have a computer, or they can read a book, but they're not part of a community. They become part of a community when they're connected. And the essential connection is the teacher. I've been involved in some international work recently, thinking about this pandemic across the world and how different nations are responding. And what's really interesting is that nowhere in the world have we got it sorted. Nowhere in the world. So even in those parts of the world where there's huge connectivity, where there's a state curriculum with all lessons online, even in those parts of the world, there's an issue there if the relationship between the teacher and the class of students diminishes. So the connections that you are establishing with your children, with your families, with your young people, with your colleagues are amazingly important. And we need to be able to think differently about how we might do that. So just this week, we received into our virtual office a choir that had come together. And this is what was from a secondary school that had put together a song where they were all singing, but they were all singing remotely and then joined all of that together to create a celebration. We've seen examples online of teachers creating radio programs where every child in the class might have contributed something and then pulling it all together to make a broadcast or a video or all kinds of things. And this is symptomatic of the way that as teachers we try to think, what can we do that is going to enable some learning but is also going to crucially enable us to make sure that we believe and can respond as a group, as a class, as a community. So any creative ideas that you've got will be brilliant to hear about in the next part of this session, because we'll have some questions and answers. Ways in which you've been able to connect and make meaning for your young people as we work separately but together will be really interesting to hear about. The fifth reason is that we make a difference. And we continue to make a difference as teachers. But at this point in time, when there's quite a lot of anxiety rushing around, I think, teachers, I believe most teachers came into the profession of being a teacher because they wanted to make a difference. They were passionate about their subject, maybe. They were passionate about being able to reduce the impact of disadvantage. They were passionate about being able to work with children and young people to help them understand and ultimately to be the best people that they can be. All of that is still there. It's absolutely still there. And not only for the children and young people, but of course also for their families. We heard just as we first went into lockdown, there were many stories emerging on social media of young people being kind of drilled, as it were, by their parents, thinking they were going to run a sort of home school, home from home, school from school type arrangement. And we've even got sort of pseudo Ofsted judgments being put up in people's windows. I hope very much that actually, when all this is over, that the role of the teacher will be more celebrated than it has ever been. I'm not sure, when I say when it's all over, I'm not sure how long that might take. I don't think any of us are sure about that. But I do think it's most likely that there will be a continuation of a blended approach with much more learning going on at home. And so therefore, the relationships that are established between home and school, between you as a teacher and the parents and carers of the young people you work with, are more important than they've ever been. And I think it's perfectly understandable that different families, different ways of working will emerge. And I think we have to be able to understand that, celebrate that, make it work in the best way possible, because nobody benefits from feeling guilty and nobody benefits from feeling inadequate or unable to do the best they can for their child. It's a very unusual parent that doesn't want a better life for their child than they have had for themselves. So working closely with our families and our young people to really make that difference is vitally important. And of course, there will always be young people in our classes that we're worried about more than others. And those are the ones where we have to try extra hard to do what we can to make a connection. But making a difference sometimes is something that we don't even see. So we have that aspiration, and sometimes we might think that we're not having the impact that we thought we were coming into this career to have. And yet actually we can never really know the difference that we make. And if we keep on trying, if we keep on being optimistic and upbeat and welcoming, and even if it's difficult initially to make contact and then suddenly we have a breakthrough and we have a communication from a young person maybe we haven't heard from for a while, it's all about how we act in that moment and how we celebrate the fact that we are getting through. So keeping on trying is really important in that place. We also provide leadership, whatever our role is in school, whether you are a member of the leadership team or whether you are newly into school. All teachers are leaders. By definition, we're leaders because we have, probably 30 youngsters in our class at any one point. And my goodness me, if you don't have any leadership, the classroom is a very chaotic place. So even if you don't think of yourself as a leader, actually you are a leader. And what leaders do in times of difficulty is they try to remain calm. They try to think, what is the best way that I can find a way through in this situation for the collective benefit of the people that I'm responsible for leading? What's the best way that I can find a way through? Now, depending on your school, depending on your circumstance, depending on the subject you teach and the way that you teach it and the all kinds of things, they will all make the difference, which will mean that it will be a personal solution for you as to how you find a way through. But the leadership that you offer, both to your young people, but also with your colleagues, will be remembered and valued now more than ever. It's so important that we all realise that we make such a difference and that people look to us. That doesn't mean, however, that we have to take the whole of this issue on our shoulders and say, well, this is all my responsibility and I just need to forge a path and off I go and it's all down to me. The best leaders are really quite humble and constantly seek advice and listen and try constantly to do the best that they can. And sometimes it's perfectly acceptable, to change direction if that's what needs to happen. So if you started out in a particular way with your youngsters, working with them remotely, and it's just not working, that's where that creativity I was talking about comes in. It's about how do I find a way of connecting? How do I find a way through? And leadership is fundamental in that space. We also have an opportunity now to really celebrate working flexibly. So it's been on the agenda for women particularly, but not just women, but there's been an agenda circling around for quite some time about how do we improve the ways in which we can work flexibly within schools? How do we work in a way that means that we can work as carers, or we can balance working as a teacher with other demands in our lives? Well, the opportunity that we have now with remote working means that actually we have to celebrate flexibility. Many of us will have our own children who are at home whilst we're also trying to teach remotely. If you've got toddlers running around, you cannot be the same teacher that you once were. So being able to work flexibly and to be able to find a way through in that space and to value the contribution that we can make at a time that works for us is something that all of us across our communities need to understand. And I very much hope that that's something that, once those gains have been made, will be continued. There's also a real opportunity to make sure that we keep learning. Now, I don't mean that in this time, as we see on some of the social media sites, people saying, well, whilst I'm not in school and I'm working remotely, I'm going to learn to speak another language, I'm going to learn to sew, I'm going to move the house 2 meters to the left. Now, I'm not talking about that, but what I am saying is, as a teacher, one would hope you're also a learner, because the best of our teachers constantly want to improve, constantly want to be the best they can be. And there are more opportunities to read and to listen and to find out about teaching. There are absolute wealth of opportunities available online. But also, if you join the Chartered College, there are opportunities for you to read from our journals. So there's some front covers of our journals on the screen at the moment. We publish a journal 4 times a year. It's available on our website, but also it will be posted to you at home if you decide to join the college today. And the journals are a combination of, they're always based around a theme, but they're a combination of academic writing and teacher reflection. They're incredibly accessible without being dumbed down. We have an editorial panel of very eminent educationalists from across the world, people like Professor Dylan William, Professor John Hattie, all kinds of Professor Becky Francis, all kinds of very well thought of educationalists working with teachers and an editorial team at the Chartered College to produce a very highly regarded award-winning journal. So I would really recommend this to you alongside the other reading that, of course, there is a tremendous amount available at the moment, all of which is aimed at helping you to reflect and to enhance the quality of what you do in the classroom. But also we're producing resources now that will soon be available that will help you to really enhance the quality of what you're doing in terms of remote teaching, which is not to imply in any way that what you're doing isn't good enough now. It's just to say there's always more to find out. And in the spirit of that, and in the spirit of wanting to raise the status of teaching, we are, as a chartered college, able to offer chartered status. And so our plans have had to change, of course, along with everybody else's. We were hoping to start running this from April. We've run 2 cohorts already, and this is now a central cohort starting in June of 2020. But there will also be an opportunity to study with schools across the country. So you can see on the slide that we have a very wide take-up of schools who want to run the Chartered Teacher Programme. So this is a programme which involves reading, literature review, but you focus on an area that you are really interested in improving in your classroom. And I know you can't be in your classroom right now, so you won't be able to complete a Chartered Teacher route until we're back in schools, or at least partially back in schools. But the opportunity is there for you to think about making an application. So there are some cohorts that are running from June, some that are running from September. We will run more next year. But it's a 14-month programme. It is quite hard. It includes written examinations. You have to have been teaching for 3 years before you think about applying. But to do this will be to be accredited for the practice in your classroom. There are assessments all the way through, which help to evidence your expertise. This is not something that you can do by going up into the loft and getting resources down and saying, oh, I taught this and gaining some recognition for it. This has to be about what you will be doing when you're back in your classrooms working with your young people. But you can begin the reading around for that. And I would really encourage you to think about whether or not you might want to study to become a chartered teacher, to really become up to date with all the latest thinking around cognitive science, around child and young person's development, about the development of the brain, about how we can optimize the teaching that we do. And then the final reason, I would say, my top 10 of why we need to be cheerful right now is because we are the ones who make the weather. We are the ones as teachers who either storm into our classrooms and slam the door, or who walk in with a big smile, or a mixture of both. The children and young people in our classes, they can sense within nanoseconds probably what kind of mood we're in, what kind of day we're going to have together, what kind of lesson we're going to have. And the same is true now. Although you are now at a computer screen, you're not necessarily in school, or if you're in school, you're probably only with a very few students, the way that you behave, the way that you interact, the encouragement that you give, the clarity with which you teach, all of these make the weather. And I think we have enough worry in our lives now. We should be offering some sunshine. You can do that. And I very much hope that you will feel able to do that, because the more that you have a sense of strength of purpose and optimism, the more that your children and young people will look to you and will respond to that, because they will feel safe in your company. They will feel safe that you are telling them it's going to be all right. This is what we're going to do. We're going to get through this together, and we're going to actually make this really purposeful and meaningful and even engaging. This is going to be something that we haven't done before, but that isn't going to stop us making it the best it can possibly be. So those are my top 10 recommendations. I'm very interested to hear your questions and to think further about, how we can make all of this work. I've been shamelessly optimistic, but you know what? That's okay sometimes, isn't it? It's all right sometimes to really try and look on the bright side. I would just say, if you're not already a member, then it's only £3.75 a month to join the Chartered College. If you're a trainee, it's completely free. If you're an NQT, it's not even £3.75. It's £1.88, I think, a month. So do think about whether that's something that you might wish to do. We would love you to be members. But in the meantime, thank you so much for listening. And I'm really looking forward now to being able to engage with you and to have a debate about the issues that I've raised in my top 10 reasons to be cheerful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. That was amazing. So much to think about, so much to look at. And the questions have been coming in thick and fast. And I know that you've been moving away on your keyboard, answering quite a lot there. Is there, having a look at the questions there, anything that you want to raise live with the attendees now?
Thank you, Arv. So one of the questions that came in just at the end of that presentation was around, what do I think the new landscape will look like post-pandemic? I don't think any of us know yet, but I do think that the ways in which teachers have been working together have truly impressed the nation. They've certainly been very enabling in terms of the sudden kind of change in terms of examinations no longer being offered, the fact that teachers will need to do rigorous assessment of their students, the ways in which we're relating to parents. I very much hope that society, having had a taste of having to teach their children at home, will look at this and suddenly think, wow, actually the teaching profession does a pretty amazing job. And the Chartered College is very keen to work with teachers, to work alongside unions. We're not a union, we're very much a professional body, but to really reimagine what might be possible to do. And I think there will be a lot more blended learning. I don't think schools will just go straight back. I don't think it's likely that in September we'll have everybody back in classrooms. So there's a lot that we can start to build together, and it's an opportunity for us. We just have to take that opportunity and build on it, I think.
And definitely, I mean, in terms of moving forward, I think there is recognition amongst many people in our society, to be fair, with other key workers that we've got and people that have kept a sense of normality going as much as possible, albeit in a different way. Is there anything else that you could think that, in terms of when the pandemic does end and we return to a new normal, whatever that might be, how do we keep that enthusiasm for the sector going? Because I'm not saying that people are fickle, but as we get back to a normality, then I think that there are other pressures and other things that then come to light. And then sometimes there is the tendency that we can perhaps reprioritize what we do, and sometimes we may not be at the forefront again in the same way that we are at the moment. What can we do as a profession to make sure that we keep that enthusiasm that people have at the moment for education alive when we return back to schools?
Okay, so we've been receiving lots of questions from members and from fellows that are very much in that sort of vein around what is it that we can do collectively as a profession moving forward. So we are just about to do some work to open a new area on our website, again, that's freely available for everybody. So this is not about a recruitment drive, but it is about a big conversation around the future of education. And we want to look globally. So we're very aware that teaching is now a global profession. 250,000 of teachers trained in this country teach internationally. And I think we have more opportunity than ever to create a global response to how do we raise the status of teaching, but also how do we make sure that we are the best prepared that we can be, the best qualified that we can be in terms of responding to our children and our communities. So I think there's something really important about increasing the diversity of our workforce. I talked about flexibility of the workforce, but I think that global outlook, particularly post-Brexit maybe, that global outlook for education is really vital. And I've been on quite a few calls over the last few weeks with international educators. And as I mentioned in my presentation, nobody has got this sorted. There's nowhere in the world where people are saying, right, that's absolutely fine, pandemic, never mind, all our students are online, everybody's learning brilliantly, it's all going to be amazing. When we go back, there'll be no impact on attainment. The reality is, of course, there's going to be a very diverse picture in terms of what happens when we eventually return to thinking about being in classrooms, because some students will have been very gainfully employed doing all kinds of learning in the interim, and others perhaps won't at all. So, there was a Sutton Trust report that was published very recently that showed that over a third of our students have not logged on at all, haven't been available, haven't been engaged with any kind of remote learning. But when you think about the report that was published last year by Askell, the forgotten third, that would kind of add up. So there are things that weren't working in our education system prior to the pandemic. And that was to do with, young people being written off, being told that they weren't going to achieve very highly. What's your motivation for engagement if you feel that you can't contribute? So there's something there that really, I think, is an imperative for all of us to try and address. And ironically, because the situation is more challenging now, we're being more creative in terms of what we think about that. We could have been having these conversations internationally at any time in the last number of years. The technology's been available. It's only been in the last few weeks, though, with a collective imperative that we've started to do this. And the Chartered College really wants to lead the way in responding to this in as open a way as possible to try and say, what can we do? And by the way, this is not about asking for permission. So we're completely independent of government. This is not about us asking for permission from government. This is about us working with the profession to find the best ways through to enable our young people and our children and our teachers to relish education in the best possible way. So there's lots of questions coming through, and if I just have a look at the moment, you know, there are questions around inclusion. How do we make sure that we balance the learning needs of every child? Now, these are questions that actually should be worrying us normally, because in any classroom, you know, in any classroom with 30 children, there's always going to be a variety of need and response to anything that we're teaching. And the impact of disadvantage has been there for a long time. So the notion of narrowing the gap was already something we were worried about. I think the reality is that there isn't a quick solution to this. You know, we are going to need to work as creatively as we can. I was talking to a deputy head of a big East End London school earlier this week, and she was talking about the fact that many of the girls in their school do not have connectivity. And so what the staff have done is they have taken the list of the whole school, and they've divided it amongst themselves. And they have students that are their kind of key students. They're visiting flats, they're delivering food, they're giving out resources, they're responding to questions. They're also, they've got another team sort of back in school trying to provide remote learning where it's accessible. But, you know, it's a very diverse, on the ground kind of response, which is what you would expect, I think, from our profession, because, you know, our teachers are amazing. But the response that school is making in East London could be an incredibly different response to the one that maybe someone else I was talking to who was saying that 100% of her students are online. So she was running a school where they've got 750 primary age students. Every single one of them was online, but they weren't teaching lessons in a kind of, here's an hour's input from the teacher, now go off and do a worksheet. They were setting tasks that groups were going off to do, groups were collaborating, coming back, doing presentations. You know, it was a much more interactive, creative way of working. And, you know, quite a few of the questions coming through about how do we support parents? Well, one of the ways that we support parents is by interacting with our children and our young people in a way that means they can respond independently, that they don't need to be saying to mum or dad, come and help me with this, I don't understand what I've got to do. So being able to set open-ended tasks, all of these kinds of things can be really helpful in this situation. But I would emphasize again, you know, the problems that were there before the pandemic are here now, but they're just amplified. So, you know, the issue around NEETs, the issue around lack of engagement, all of those things, they're still there. So it's not as if we can suddenly wave a magic wand at the moment, but I do think it brings the questions into sharp relief in terms of what we might do nationally around assessment, around reducing inequality and poverty in society, which is what the root of this issue is. And that goes way beyond education, I realise that, but it's important to say, because for a long time in schools we've been effectively judged on the basis of what we can do, and there's only so much that we can do within education. I know we work incredibly hard, but if you're trying to serve a community where there isn't any additional learning capacity beyond what the school can offer, which is the case if you haven't got connectivity or you haven't got the incentive or the motivation to look beyond, to learn independently, then there's a problem, and it was a problem that was there already. Another question that's just come up, which is quite interesting, I think, and I'm certainly feeling this, is the whole work-life balance and boundaries between when are you at work and when you're at home, which is much more difficult when you are, you know, maybe working from home a lot more. Because it's very tempting, or maybe it feels like a real imperative that that you respond to emails and that you're constantly on the phone and replying. And there's because of the ironic situation is, because of this heightened connectivity, there are many families and parents who feel like, well, what are those teachers doing anyway? Surely it'd be fine for me to just drop them an email now and they'll be able to answer within 10 minutes, without maybe a recognition of what it is that we actually do. And those of us that are in leadership roles You know, we will all be familiar with the children or young people or the parents perhaps in our schools who sort of think we just sit in our office all day long, don't we? So we're just waiting for the phone to ring. So I think there's something around establishing times when you will be available. And that may be times when you're available for parents, times when you're available to respond to queries about teaching and learning, times when you're available for your staff. And trying to, and I know this is this is me trying to tell you when I can't do this myself, but the idea of trying to sort of set some boundaries around that so that you also have time for your own family and your own well-being. Because what's really clear, I think, is that none of us are immune to the anxieties and concerns about what is happening to our world at the moment. You know, we can try very much to fill others up. We can try very much to be the positive voice in the way that I've described. But in order to do that, we ourselves need to be able to find ways in which we can help ourselves feel better so that we can give out to others. At the moment, and just to give a small example of this, so at the moment, I'm on Twitter, and I hadn't been on Twitter for a while. I'd sort of moved away. We've got a corporate account at the Chiltern College, and I thought maybe people don't need to hear from me. But when this started to happen, I thought, no, I feel like I need to speak directly to teachers. That's what I would do if I was in school. I would be establishing a much more obvious leadership role. And so I've returned to Twitter, and I'm relentlessly trying to find positive ways of supporting everybody. And typically what I do is, you know, I wake up in the morning and I think, okay, what shall I say? What shall I say to whoever might be listening or may not be listening, to encourage them? But some days that's more difficult than others. And that's because I'm a human being like everybody else. And some days it's harder to just be able to be open and positive because there may be things happening in one's own life that mean that feels more difficult. That's okay, I think. That's okay. It's about how we make sure we top each other up. And the Teach Together service that I was talking about is available for all teachers, all leaders. You don't have to be a member of the college. Anybody can join that. And that's, I think, very, very helpful in terms of just making sure that we realise that we're part of a community. This is a collective endeavour. You know, it's not all on your shoulders, even though it might feel like it is. Just looking at the questions, do we have anybody who wants to come in live, or are we just responding to online questions?
I mean, we've got a couple of people that have got their hands up at the moment. I've got Daniel. If Daniel is listening, I'm just going to unmute you. I'm going to allow you to speak, and then we can have a look at, all of a sudden loads of hands have gone up. Okay. So Daniel, if you're ready, I'm just going to unmute you and you can ask Alison your question. So Daniel, you're now unmuted. If you've got your question to ask, if you're there. Daniel?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, good morning, Dame. Thank you very much for your insight. My question is as follows. What do you do in terms of your head teacher not being so positive at the moment?
Okay, thank you. So the question is, what do you do if your head teacher is not as positive? So I've worked in many schools throughout my career, and sometimes I've worked for really positive leaders, and sometimes I haven't. And I think when you don't, what you need to do is to look around your team and find who are the energy givers amongst your team, who are the people that make you feel better, who are the people that will build you up rather than knock you down. And try and establish a line of communication with them, because, you know, obviously the culture that you work in is the culture that you work in, and you need to be able to respond to the parameters that are set by the leadership team. But your own well-being and your own positivity and your own kind of approach that you take will massively impact on the students and young people that you work with. So finding some positive colleagues to build up and for them to build you up is a really important thing to do at the moment. And also to try to, and this may feel really difficult, but to try to empathize with what might your school leadership team be experiencing at the moment that might mean they don't look and feel so positive. It's a really, really difficult time. And I would hate for people to come away from this thinking that I've trivialized it. I absolutely know how mind-bending this is in terms of trying to do the best we can for everybody. And when you're a school leader, you're looking at trying to manage and support your staff, but you've got your parents, you've got your young people, you've got the kind of worry in the back of your head about what is all of this doing to the future success of our school or our group of schools. So there's a lot of pressure on school leaders, but I would genuinely say that the best way to get through it is to find the good in any situation, because there's plenty of people that can tell you what's wrong. So try and find the good. Do we have some more questions? Oh, that was really.
I'm just going to, I've got, now I'm going to try and pronounce this correctly. Adekunle Emmanuel, who's got his hand up. Adekunle, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Oh, brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the leadership you're providing. Basically, my question is this. What are some of the positivities that can be developed upon as a result of the COVID restrictions that have absolutely ushered in the use of technology in our schools? And with reference to the variations that we have in our students, what leadership do we provide in this respect, knowing fully well that we have imbalance in the use of technology and the assimilation of technology amidst these students? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So really interesting question. So yes, so firstly, I think one of the positives is our own use of technology is developing really quickly. I mean, I do a lot of, or I used to do a lot of public speaking all over the country and internationally. I had never, until I was asked to by Chiltern to develop a film, a video. I'd never done that. I'd never even done a selfie video until this crisis emerged. So our own professional development in terms of using technology effectively is growing. I think in terms of the difference within our students and their different capacity to engage online or not, we will need to find other ways of celebrating what our students can do. And that is long overdue, I think, because if we, as a society, we privilege capacity to read and write and articulacy probably over everything else, apart from football. Football's quite important, I think, in lots of people's lives. But the idea that we need to look more carefully about what it is that young people are able to do in this situation. What are they managing to find to excel in? So again, yesterday, I saw online an example of a year 6 pupil whose parent had posted that they weren't really able to do very much of what the school was sending home, but nevertheless, here are all the things that this student was cooking and producing. And there were photographs of amazing range of baked goods that this young person had been engaging with. And you sort of think, when would we normally privilege that kind of learning over everything else? So we have to be responsive to our different homes, our different circumstances, and also the very many different talents of our students, and celebrate those. Once we're back in classrooms, whatever that looks like, there will be a return to some of the traditional ways of working, many of the traditional ways of working. But I hope that we will also have learned something in this time about the very many ways in which we should be celebrating achievement. And it isn't just the traditional, can you do well in an exam? We have an opportunity, I hope, to think more broadly. Thank you for your question. Brilliant.
And hopefully that answers your question. I am going to ask you one more question because I've just seen somebody pop up on the list that I think I would definitely like. It's going to be Anne Palmer. I'm going to unmute you in a minute. But I just wanted to say, I've just had a message from Sufyan, who's on Twitter at the moment, and actually the discussion is really coming alive online there as well. And we're actually trending nationally now using the hashtag LDeduchat hashtag. So those of you that are also using Twitter at the moment while this is going on, do join in the discussion. We are going to carry on, and I'm hoping that Alison, you're going to be able to chip in online as well. So I'm just going to move quickly to Anne Palmer, and then I think we'll wrap this up, if that's okay. So Anne, if you're ready with your voice, I'm going to unmute you. There we go, Anne. Okay, you should be able to speak now.
Hi, good morning, Alison.
Morning.
I suppose where my thinking is at the moment is that we see a lot of heads are preoccupied at the moment with the data entry for the GCSEs and the A-levels, which of course is very essential. But I don't see a forum for the sharing of good practice around what the schools are going to look like when they open up. There are heads groups which are working together to look at things like the mental health of the children, the mental health of the staff, curriculum adaptation, but I don't see a national forum for where heads are able to share that practice, so that when schools open up, they open up with considered measures, so to speak. So I'm wondering whether Chartered College, or if there are any other forums that are playing a role in that currently or over the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you, Anne. So we are, as I mentioned, we are working very hard at the moment to develop a new area on our website where we take global contributions, where we have video examples, where we have case studies from system leaders and from colleagues in exactly the way that you've just described. It's not our role to provide resources for teaching. Those are amply covered in all kinds of other places, such as the BBC, the Oak Academy, NCETM, science groups. There's all kinds of groups that are providing advice around teaching, but the Chartered College is around providing support for professional learning, for support for a new pedagogy of blended learning beyond now, but also for the future, and also a forum for debate about what our profession needs and wants for the future, that we can learn for the future. So we're very much moving towards that. I'm sure you can appreciate that establishing all of these things takes a little bit of time, but we are completely wanting to do this. And we, I believe you're one of our fellows, Anne. We're very keen to work with our fellows of the Chartered College as well, to encourage them to contribute. I'm also a member of a group at DFE who are looking at the whole debate around when we open schools, how we open schools, what are the kinds of conditions that will need to be in place. So the views of our members will be definitely fed back, and we're about to send a survey out next week. We're doing research around across the world when there have been challenging circumstances. We've never experienced anything like a pandemic, clearly, but circumstances such as earthquake or floods or natural disasters which have meant that schools have been closed for a long time. Research that looks into what are the consequences been and what are the kinds of actions that we will want to learn from those kinds of circumstances. And I can already tell you that trauma in our young people and response to trauma is something that is an inevitability. It's a very unfortunate fact, but it is an inevitability. And so wanting to provide access to resources around that is going to be key, and also lobbying for a greater response from the mental health community. Services that have been, quite frankly, eroded dramatically over the last decade are going to be needed more than ever. So there's a lot we can do, but I've been very grateful today to be involved in this debate and to hopefully share some ideas about how we might work together going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Alison. I think an absolutely fascinating debate. What I've noticed is that there's been similar strands, no matter what the topic title is, that are coming out. And I think it works on many levels. So you have student impact, you have parental impact, and then you have the actual organisation, the educators, the staff, the teachers, and then I think you mentioned in terms of leaders. And I think one of the things that, just to coin a phrase from a while back, is that was trending last year, is that I think we just need to learn to be kind and be kind to each other. And the other thing that you said earlier on is that there isn't a single facet of our community, whichever level, whoever you are, that hasn't been impacted in some way. And at this time, being kind and thinking, where is that person that's communicating with me? What's their situation? Why are they reacting in the way that they're reacting? And it may be in character, it may not be in character, but whichever way we look at it is that I think our default position needs to be kind, and try to have an appreciation of everybody's situation, no matter what you think of them, who they are. So I think that kind of threads through everything, all the questions that have been asked, really. What I'm going to ask you to do is slightly unusual compared to before, is that at 10 o'clock, or just after 10 o'clock, I'm going to, if we all go on mute, if you want to carry on answering some questions, if the people that need to leave, they can leave. And if there's the questions that need answering, you can carry on answering those on the Q&A, but we'll actually close down. So I'm going to wrap up now in terms of the actual formal part of this. And then if you want to carry on typing away while I speak, absolutely fine. Thank you so much again, Dame Alison. It's been absolutely fascinating, this whole discussion today. So looking forward in terms of what we've got this week, we've got Nadine Cotton, who's going to be looking at deep dives, and we're looking at how to prepare and plan for deep dives. So again, a completely different topic, and it's a different nerve. Next week, we have got 4 brilliant speakers next week. We've got Will Smith for a second session next week. He's looking at the leadership of improvement as his theme. We've got Simon Webb, who's looking at Ofsted and the education framework in terms of the story so far. We've got Pran Patel, who's going to be looking at perception, bias and decolonisation for curriculum. And on Friday, we've got another session on deep dives, and this is with reference to English as a subject, and that's with Nikki Goodman and some of her colleagues. So if you follow at Chiltern TSA and look at the discussion there, Marcus Ray, who's one of our primary leads, is actually having quite a lengthy debate with a range of people on there. Again, a lot of similar questions. When you do have a chat, if you're looking for this webinar series, if you look at the hashtag LDeduchat, please use that, please follow that. Sufyan Sadiq will also be joining, who's the director of Chiltern Teaching School. He'll also be live on Twitter as well, answering questions. So without further ado, we'll look forward to seeing you at the next session. And again, thank you so much for your time this morning. See you on Friday.